Greetings from the far side of the galaxy, I'm Fury, your host the most, wishing you a very happy Pride Month. It's June, so you know what that means. The worst people on Twitter are having meltdowns, so I figured I'd contribute to it. The name of the game is Tokyo Afterschool Summoners, aka Housamo. For those that don't know, it's a lot like Fate Stay Night, or well, Fate Grand Order. To explain a very weird plot very quickly, a wall is constructed around Tokyo, trapping everyone inside, and transients, i.e. characters from various mythologies, all get transported through gates. And people use sacred artifacts to fight in these app battles to claim territory and ultimately assert themselves above others, like the Holy Grail War. So yeah, it's a lot like Fate Stay Night, but you know, gay-er. For me, at least, its mediocre gameplay is carried by one thing: its plot. You see, from the ground up, Housamo is an allegory, not just for being queer, but being a minority of any kind. Let's play back what I said earlier. Transients, i.e. characters from various mythologies, all get transported through gates. You see, these transients do not just show up in Tokyo for no reason. Time and time again, the one thing used to form the Rainbow Bridge connecting their worlds to Tokyo is fundamentally a desire to leave. One of the characters, Temujin, even says so himself. The force that brought us all to this world is tragedy. There's a reason that in a cast of like 200 something characters, not a single one of them is homesick. For example, let's use this guy right here. His name is Fuga. He's based on the Lovecraftian god. In his home world, he had his own star, but he was so isolated he didn't even know what loneliness was. However, upon arriving in Tokyo, he's found the opportunity to actually learn who he is. It's upon learning that he isn't alone, meeting others like him, that he's become his own person. It's a lot like when a sheltered kid stumbles upon their local GSA or maybe even a queer elder. To learn that what you're feeling does have a name, and even better, that you aren't alone. Or maybe they're like this white tiger here, Licho. He's based on the most popular tale from the Sangetsuki, aka the moon over the mountain. If you watch Bungo Stray Dogs, this should be familiar to you since it's also based on the Sangetsuki. In his home world, Licho was renowned for his knowledge. Everyone expected him to be something great. However, those expectations were a lot like his height. He fell short. Sinking lower and lower, lashing out whenever brought face to face with his own incompetence, unable to even face his friend, Licho turned tail and ran. Not only does the gifted child syndrome hit hard, but Licho's story also speaks to something else. The creeping sense of shame and fear of disappointment that someone might see the you that you hide. I suppose you could say Licho would rather hide in a closet than face his friend. It's interesting to see the way Housamo handles these topics and the reason I chose these two specifically. Cthulhu's story centers around learning about oneself, while Licho's story centers around accepting oneself. Cthulhu understands what he wants, he just has trouble getting there. Licho also understands what he wants, but he rejects even beginning the journey. It's part of the reason why I think Housamo tells such an effective story. Its narratives can speak to multiple people who are at different points in life, or even someone as they move from one point to another. Licho's is a story about learning to take that first step and accept who you are. And Cthulhu's story comes after, learning to define yourself after acceptance. I do want to know what we see in the Fortune Festival event. Despite having completed his arc, Licho is still prone to falling into the same old habits. It's nice to get representation of nonlinear growth, and that growth is not stagnant, it's something that actively needs to be maintained. But not everything in Housamo is like Licho and Cthulhu, whose struggles arise from within themselves. Just like in real life, sometimes our problems come from the world around us, which brings me to the next section of this video. Rather than focusing on two characters, I'd like to focus on two worlds. Those being the world of Eden and the land of Wa. Eden is the world based on the Abrahamic religion, and surprise surprise, there are a lot of what we call systemic issues. Eden is one big metaphor for ostracized outgroups, specifically how those in the in-group can benefit from creating those. The world is quite literally defined by having these in-groups and out-groups for the sole purpose of elevating one at the expense of the other. And these out-groups serve an important place in Eden as scapegoats. We see this in the three great beasts, Ziz, Behemoth, and Leviathan. They were sacrificial scapegoats created to bear the burden of Eden's problems that they had no fault in making. To be blamed for society's ills that you had no part in making. Seems a bit familiar, doesn't it? Real quick, since we're about halfway through this video, give or take, please like and subscribe, donate to my Ko-fi and Patreon, and check out my live streams on Mondays. Now, back to what I was talking about. Do you remember what I said about Housamo also being an allegory for being other kinds of minorities, not just LGBTQ? Because now we head for the land of Wa, which is based on feudal Japan. Okay, so in the lore of Housamo, each world has a method of continuation that keeps their world from falling apart. The aforementioned world of Eden does this by maintaining a false sense of perfection, kicking out those who fall short. The land of Wa's method of continuation is racism. No, I'm not joking, it's like actual fucking racism. This dude's a victim of a Tulsa race massacre, and this guy got murdered for having a human wife, being in a literal interracial relationship. Do I even need to go on? There's a point where it stops being subtext and just becomes text. But now we get to the main event. Also, spoiler warning for Husamo's main story, because now I'm talking about the protagonist and the overarching narrative the game has to offer. The protagonist of Housamo isn't just the protagonist. To keep comparing Housamo to Fate Stay Night, the protagonist is also the Holy Grail. To win the game, they must be obtained. Ignoring the allegory of the protagonist being objectified, it also means that the protagonist is the center of everyone's problems. They're hated for something that they have no control over. In the words of the immortal Lady Gaga, they were just born this way. But the theming goes deeper than that. What makes the protagonist so desired is that they are the vessel for the EXILES. A group of 24 souls from 24 different worlds who are kicked out for one reason or another. The EXILES are a whole metaphor that I do not have the time to get into, but more importantly, each of those exiled souls comes with their own history. This means the protagonist can automatically become friends with those that like those exiled souls, but they can also make enemies just as easily. Enter the game's main antagonist, the 24 world representatives. 24 people, as the name implies, in charge of representing their world and the systems therein. They're basically bigotry personified. From objectification to homophobia to even racism, it is their duty to make sure that these systems are maintained. However, there's something you should keep in mind. These world representatives are all in Tokyo. And once more, no one is in Tokyo against their will, including them. Despite representing their worlds, despite having all that power and prestige, they wanted to leave. Temujin was forced to kill his friend when he would not become part of his horde. Baylor was forced to kill his grandson in combat that neither of them wanted. Even Yoritomo, the representative of the land of racism, the land of Wa, is part Oni himself. He himself is part of the minority that he oppresses, but he uses the system to his favor, elevating himself at the expense of others. He's like that one dude from Django, the butler, the guy played by Samuel L. Jackson. Hang on. Okay, so apparently his name was Stefan. The point I'm trying to get at here is that the world representatives are a testament to how systems of oppression don't just harm the minorities. They harm everyone in some way, and that's precisely why they need to be dismantled. I could go on, but this video is long enough as it is. Now it's time for our Patreon shoutouts. For our 3 stars, we have special thanks to 87 Werehog, Deku, Zura Chow, Choron, Garon Lefay, Dragon Yara, Unknown RC, Lightning Shadow, and Kayun. For our 4 stars, we have Miki Moon, the poem penning tiger. And for our Super D-Tuber special 5-star shoutouts, we have... First, Vanilla Flower, the wanderer from solitary space. Then, Poor Mage, the Heartmender. Next, SkyKing64, the meddlesome TA. And finally, Mahagasaur, the indiscriminate Shadow Slayer. Thank you for watching. Do be sure to like, subscribe, and donate to my Ko-fi and Patreon. As always, I'm your host Fury, signing out.